Lovely to see everyone. Thank you for coming. I just want to start by saying thank you to Vic, to Becky and Jake. They work in our research office and they do a stellar job every single day. And they've organised this, so thank you. I'm a bit worried tonight. This might get quite emotional, so forgive me. So when we think about researchers, professors, we do often think about PhDs. We think about awards, we think about accolades. We do, rightly, wrongly, we think about numbers of publications. We think about research grant capture. But I feel really strongly that there's another side to this story. And that's what I want to focus on tonight. Focus on the importance of people on this journey. So, some of you might not have been to inaugural lectures before, and essentially you could do whatever you want to do. But it's an opportunity to talk about your research career, what you've done, and your future directions. But I felt quite strongly that I didn't want to do that. It felt too much about the ends, the outcomes, and really, if we just take a moment to reflect, those ends, those outcomes, they're a really small part of this journey. And there's a bigger thing that we need to consider. So the other side of the story that I want to tell tonight, it does recognise the importance of people. Some of you guys, some of the people online. And sometimes that story gets lost. We do think about impact. We go back to money. We go back to numbers of publications. We've been adopted into this clinical guideline. But for me, the biggest impact in my career has been the support that I've got from so many of you, so many people online. And I think probably one of the most rewarding parts of my job now, and I feel very fortunate that I can now offer some support to people in their journey. So that's tonight's story. And forgive me, just a caveat, these views are mine. I'll be talking about some of you in the room, I'll be talking about some of the colleagues online. It might be a completely different recollection to what you've got, so forgive that. By all means, please challenge me over a glass of wine afterwards, but yeah, they're my views, my memories, and my reflection, and that's Chester. So I'll start the story tonight really with my time training as a physiotherapist in the 90s, mid-90s to late 90s. I think for those of you around at the time, life was much simpler. We were told that if someone has a sore shoulder, it's because they've got adhesions in their tendon, and we were just taught to rub the hell out of the tendon on their skin. And it's completely implausible, it's ridiculous, but we did it. And then we got our ultrasound machines out, and we started being taught ultrasound by popping it into a bowl of water, and it used to blow a few bubbles as the sound waves came out. And then we thought we'd magically put that onto someone's shoulder and it would improve inflammation, it would change cellular response. It's nonsense, but we believed it at the time. We were also told that if someone's back hurts, it's because they've got stiff joints. And we were told to do mobilizations where you just press on their skin. That's all you'd be doing. And we were taught that that would be gliding a joint in someone's spine. Just by pushing on someone's skin gently, it would be gliding a facet joint under 6 inches of fat, muscle, and fascia. It's nonsense again, but again, we believed it. Because the model at the time was that you basically modelled what people had done before, over 40, 50, 60 years. And famously, the textbooks that we were given at the time that we followed were written by our forefathers and barely made reference to any research whatsoever. We were taught by experts, we were led by experts. That's where we were. And I've got to admit, I found training personally quite challenging because I didn't believe much of what we were being taught. It just felt at times a little bit ridiculous. But we trusted our expert forefathers. And to be fair, you know, if you look at the time, there wasn't a great deal of research. I don't know whether any of you knew this, but the first search done on Google was in 1998. And that was the year that I qualified as a physio. And in 1998, if you'd have put the rotator cuff, so that's the tendons in the shoulder, where we've done some research, if you'd have put that into Google alongside controlled trials, you'd have got 1,390 hits for the almost preceding century. I know that sounds a lot, but for the researchers in your room, you know that's a tiny amount of research, and most of it is absolute garbage that you wouldn't look at. But then look at the almost 25 years since 1998. If you put the same search term into Google, you get over 17,500 hits for the same search term. So that's a 12-fold increase. So it shows how the landscape has changed. I couldn't help indulge myself and put rotator cuff and Littlewood in there. Back in 1998, 8 hits. But now, if you do that in 2022, there's 1,130 hits, of course, not all to do with me, but that's a 141-fold increase. So it shows how our landscape has changed from when I trained, at least in part. And this is, so I started working as a physio in 98 in Huddersfield, which is my hometown. And that's, choking. That's when I first met Alison Sharp. Alison, she was a senior physio at the time. And you know, one of those people, when you first meet them, they're absolutely formidable. And you're a little bit scared of them. But then, as I got to know Alison, she was just the most kind, just really caring, just thoughtful, passionate person. And I got to know her, and she became a friend. And unfortunately, we lost Alison just 4 years ago. Way too young. But we were doing an in-service training session, as physios did at the time. Again, we were following what the experts did. So as junior physiotherapists, we were copying what the senior physiotherapists did. And that's what they'd been trained in 10, 15, 20 years ago. That was our model. And I remember this one training session, we were being taught interferential therapy. You just put this machine on people and it zaps them a bit and it feels nice for a while and then it doesn't have any other effects. Well, that's my reflection now. But I remember at the time when physiotherapists were still all very polite and would get along with each other. I remember Alison coming into the room and she stopped the session and she said, but what does the literature say about this? Not what do you believe, what does the literature say? And it was the first time that I'd ever heard a physiotherapist say that, honestly. And it was frightening, a little bit threatening, because we didn't do that at the time. But with Alison, it came from such a position of passion. She just wanted to do better for her patients, and she wanted to start integrating research evidence into practice and challenge. But challenge, even though it was threatening at times, the basis of that challenge was really good-natured, and that stayed with me for a lifetime. But it really made me think. So this again was a time in 1998 where our senior colleagues were coming back from short courses and they were being taught an approach called kinetic control. And so we thought we had the next answer, and we'd spend hours in our pants like you do as physios. You train in your underpants, don't you? It's just, and you just get used to it and you don't understand why other people find it strange. But we were qualified by then, that's a sideline. But we were taught, you know, that there's a deep muscle in your abdomen, that if you contract that deep muscle, that's what's causing everyone's back pain. This deep muscle that's under layers of fat fascia, we were genuinely kidding ourselves that we could feel this thing contract, and when it wasn't contracting properly, and when it was. And I just, in the midst of all this, I just thought, oh, what are we doing? Why are we doing this stuff? Again, it just felt implausible. And following a certain path, again, as physiotherapists did, you tend to, if you worked in a certain hospital, you'd work in a certain way because you'd follow the senior physiotherapists there. If you went to a different hospital, you'd work in a different way because you'd follow the senior physiotherapists there. But it made me reflect back to a third-year clinical placement I had in Leeds with Dr. Phil Commons. She'd been introduced to Mackenzie's method of mechanical diagnosis and therapy, which will be familiar to some of you, but not all of you. But again, it was developed by one of our physiotherapy forefathers. And Phil lent me the blue book that Robin Mackenzie had written. And I read it twice on the 4-week placement, backward and forwards on the train. And this approach made intuitive sense to me. It didn't feel as implausible as others. So I thought, I need to explore this more. And even though over time I questioned the approach and the value of the approach, it was something that helped me develop as an individual. And I'll talk about Emily a few times tonight, my wife. But just to give you, I guess, signal of the support that I've been given. We remortgaged our house so I could go and do this training, which looking back is absolutely, it paid for the windows that we see there as well. But the other, I got this off Google Maps recently, so the windows still work. But we borrowed several £1,000s so I could engage in this training, and it was important to me. And perhaps it wasn't so much the method or the training, but what that opportunity gave me was a chance to meet some incredible people. The first of those people is, I'm really grateful, is Julie. And I've often reflected to people that I've been really fortunate to have Julie in my life, because Julie was a member of the Mackenzie Institute. But for your sins, you were also the editor of the Clinical Interest Journal, which no one wanted to write for apart from me and Stephen. And so poor Julie had a heck of a job on. But Julie, I felt, looking back, and I see lots of it now, I felt like I was one of those almost young, angry male physios who wanted to make a point all the time. And Julie just had a lovely way of saying, just calm your boots, just chill out. And through that process just gave me so much feedback about my writing and my approach. And I was really fortunate. I got to spend 9 weeks in Cheltenham with Julie doing the clinical diploma. And it was the first time I'd really met someone who was really asking searching questions, was uncertain about the Mackenzie method, physiotherapy more broadly. And it gave me, I guess it just gave me lots of confidence to be able to explore in a different way. And I just wonder how many people get that kind of opportunity from their Julie, and I don't think many people do. But when I was, this is the second article that I wrote that Julie published in the journal, and I was looking back and reading through Julie, and I was looking at this statement that I wrote. I'll let you read it for a second because it's ridiculous. So I'm reading this now as a middle-aged man who hurts every single day. You wake up in the morning, you hobble to the bathroom. A day doesn't go by without something hurting. But the naivety of a 26 or a 27-year-old just thinking, be fine in the morning. It's not, is it? Aging really hurts and it just gets worse. So thank you for everything, Julie, but I think you should have checked me on this. And then the next person was Dr. Stephen May. I remember being in complete awe of Stephen. He was just for me, my first research legend. And again, just like Julie had given me so much time and was so patient, Stephen was the same in the research world. I don't think you'll remember this, Stephen, but I do. One Saturday night, it was about midnight, and we were emailing each other about kappa values. And I remember at one point you just said, Chris, are we really doing this at this time? But that was a mark of just Stephen's support, his commitment to do things differently. And it was around 2003 at a conference, Stephen said, would anyone like to join me to do a research project, a systematic review? And I was at the stage of life where I'd say yes to as many things as I could. And Stephen said, yeah, come along, let's do this together. And we worked together on this review. And it was a tremendous learning experience just to see someone with such vast knowledge apply this in a systematic way. But there was something that really important happened. Stephen submitted the systematic review to our first journal. It was all brand new to me. And the response was, you need to change this in a major way, major corrections. And I thought, this is brilliant. If Stephen can get major corrections from a journal, I don't care what I get in the future. If a legend can go through that process, and it kind of made me robust to that. When you submit to a journal and you get that long list, it doesn't matter because it happened to Stephen. And I've always felt resilient to that for that reason. And Stephen supported me to submit my first 2 peer-reviewed papers as a first author, but has written several books over the years. But one of the most memorable for me is the book that I put up there. It's over 20 years ago this book was written, and I still genuinely believe that most of it is still 20 years ahead of its time. And why is that? Because Stephen thinks about the research evidence and he takes a systematic approach to understanding that research evidence and then explores the most promising options. Doesn't just follow things on a whim. What does that research evidence say? Just like Alison did before. And while, the rest of us were following the experts, doing the trendy things, you might say that still happens. I think it does to a large degree. This is what Stephen was writing 20 years ago. Thinking about epidemiology, so how disease affects people, how does it change over time without treatment? Who's more likely to get these things as a way of informing treatment? And that might not sound new now, but this was 20 years ago when physiotherapists on the whole were not thinking in this way, and that was Stephen driving that agenda. And I guess, to be honest, I won't, because I'll embarrass him, but I could talk all night about the influence that Stephen has had on my career. And I just want everybody to remember that. We all need people. We don't do this on our own. And thank you, Stephen. And then my thoughts were developing rapidly. I was still working in the National Health Service at the time, asking lots of questions, having at times quite a chaotic mind. And this is where having John Moore to work with, we used to work together in a primary care centre, and then we spent some time in the hospital. But just to have that safe place to come back to, that safe voice to talk about things. We used to walk every lunchtime. I think that's where it started. We used to talk about our audits. But just to be able to bounce ideas with someone, and John would listen, and John will always talk about how I helped his career, but I don't think you've ever appreciated how much you've helped me. Thank you. So, becoming increasingly frustrated with the NHS, having lots of questions, I chose a job opportunity came up at Sheffield Hallam, and so this was a chance now to work directly with Stephen, principally a teaching job, and it was interesting to go into a university and actually find that my research outputs dropped because of the demands of the teaching job. But it was still just a tremendous experience. But I had aspirations around research. I wanted to be a researcher. So a job came up at the University of Sheffield, not a job in physiotherapy. It was a research fellow in systematic reviewing. So it was a complete change. But I felt like I had to step sideways to get where I wanted to be. And I still, it's where I met Anna, who I'll mention shortly, and so many other colleagues. But Sheffield felt like home. I didn't live there, but it felt like my working home for such a long time. And to be fair, it still does to some degree. And I think largely that's because of the people and the team that developed there. But I'll talk about that subsequent journey. But during this transition, something really important happened to me. So you'll have heard me say this before. Emily might slap me afterwards. But I thought my PhD journey had, my boat had sailed. An expensive wife, too many kids, now too many dogs and cats, and a mortgage that you can barely afford. And so the idea then of thinking I'll take a pay cut to do a PhD just didn't seem plausible. But then I came across these ideas of fellowships. So a fellowship pays your full salary costs to do your PhD, which is a tremendous opportunity. But I started applying for one of these PhD fellowships whilst I was at Sheffield Hallam, but then I was transferring to the University of Sheffield. And for those guys who have done research applications, it's tough enough anyway, but then to try and do it in transition at the time of application. And to be honest, I was losing it a bit. I was just feeling a bit too overwhelmed with it all. And I just thought, I'm going to park this. I'll get into my new job. And then I'll pick this up again. And the reason I mention this story is because I got some support from what is now the Applied Research Collaboration in Sheffield, and Professor Joe Cook was central to that. And I remember having a wobble on the train going from Huddersfield, where we lived, down to Sheffield. And I rang Joe and said, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I want to do this. And Joe just said, it'll be okay. Just let's try and do it. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter. It'll be okay. And that was a really small intervention, but it's had a massive effect on my life. And so there's just a message there that sometimes those short, kind words can go a long, long way. So I don't think Joe knows that, but I'm forever grateful. And this was now my chance to... So I was awarded this fellowship out of the blue. I was really surprised. I remember getting the email. It went into my junk file. I was cooking the kids' tea because I think, Emily, you're on placement. I think you were out. And I think I was doing some sausages, and I've got no one to tell. And your kids don't want to know, do they? They've got no interest whatsoever. And I went out into the street and there was no one there. Then you hear the smoke alarms going, and you've got no other food in the house. And but that was by the by. But I got this tremendous opportunity to do a National Institute for Health Research fellowship to support my PhD. And Stephen was a key PhD supervisor, so I got to follow that, continue that relationship. But this is where I got to meet Professor Sue Mawson. And Sue can't be here tonight. She's in Spain, having a jolly good time. And I just remember, again, I don't think Sue will mind me saying this, but again, she was someone I felt a little bit intimidated about meeting to begin with. A reputation came before her because she was just so successful, but she's just so enigmatic as well. And when I got to work with Sue, I just saw a true leader who thought about doing things differently and wasn't afraid to do things differently and was really pushing boundaries and really inspiring people. But despite that initial trepidation, again, once I got to know Sue, just like other people that I'll talk about, other people I have talked about, there was just a kind soul inside who just wanted the best for the people that she worked with. And thankfully, worked through my PhD. I still remember the rim, that bloody hat left on my head for 24 hours. It's a nightmare. And again, during this time, talking about people, just before my PhD, I was interested in doing another research study, but I was almost a lone research fellow in Sheffield. And I sent an email to Peter, Professor Peter Maliaras, saying, Dear Dr. Maliaras, could you send me a paper, please? It was just an email. He was an author on a paper that I couldn't get. And he came back, and of course, as most people do, they sent that paper back. And we just started a conversation. And I said, could I possibly lean on your expertise to name you on this grant application? Would you mind looking at it? So without even meeting, we were awarded a grant, and we published papers subsequently. So this is 11 years ago now. And we still continue that collaboration now. And the message is that there is support out there. People do want to help. And again, during my PhD, I used to keep a reflective diary, and the number of questions that Peter helped me to answer during that time, again, I just got so much from such a supportive colleague. And we met in 2015, but then I was fortunate to go down to Melbourne, where Peter lives now, in 2016. And when I was putting this together, it made me chuckle. So Peter took me to a lovely restaurant in the middle of Melbourne, really good wine, it cost a fortune. Later that year, Peter was in the country, and I met him at Crewe train station and took him to a brewer's fair. I thought, what on earth were you doing? But he clearly didn't mind too much and still remains a really key collaborator. We still continue to do research today. So, you know, these relationships that developed a long, long time ago, they continued and they've become increasingly fruitful. And Peter is now a tremendously successful researcher in Australia and just one of life's good guys. So during my PhD, you know, you look at the end, and I guess this is why I don't want to talk too much about ends and outcomes, because you look at my PhD, and I think I published something like 12, 13, 14 papers from my PhD. So you'd look at that and think, oh, that's good going. But in the midst of it, this was my recruitment chart. So we were doing a trial where we wanted to recruit two groups of people with shoulder pain. One group would receive a single exercise. One group would receive usual physiotherapy treatments. And the projection was that over 12 months, we'd recruit 210 patients. And that was about 17 to 18 patients per month. So that's the blue line. That's what I should have been following. So we started recruitment in May, and by September, rather than having, 85, 90, we had 5 patients. Absolute disaster. Prestigious NIHR fellowship going down the Swanee. What do you do? This is where I met these two characters. I met Marcus Bateman on the left in Torquay. We were at a conference together. And those of you that know me, I'm terrible for getting places way too early. I don't know what it is. I think I've inherited it. And I walked into this room, this big room, and there was just one other person there. And I don't do small talk. I find it really hard. Emily calls me all the time. So I take the dogs through the woods rather than down the main path so I can avoid speaking to people. It's just who I am. And you've got this one person, you just think, oh, I'm gonna have to, you can't just stand, can you? And I thought, and to boot, he looks like a surgeon as well. Oh. But I went over we started talking, and it was really interesting that we had shared interests and we hit it off. So that was June 2012. And Marcus has remained a close ally, a partner in crime now for the last 10 years. We've done so much work together, continue to do that. And I guess a mark of Marcus, when he chose that he wanted to do a PhD fellowship, he applied and got it first time of asking, which is typical of him. But, you know, again, another really fruitful relationship, friendship that has developed over a number of years and contributed a heck of a lot. And it was the same year I met Julie, reluctantly. You were reluctant, not me. The first hospital site that I'd opened to recruit participants, it was in Doncaster where Julie worked. And if I'm being honest, it was that experience that the seeds for tonight's lecture. The person who was supporting me on the trial at the time had come up to me earlier and said, Chris, I'm sorry, I've got a new job, I'm leaving. And what transpired is, you know, his priorities had gone elsewhere. The research project that I wanted to deliver, they were no longer his priority. And he said, but I found someone. Remember, Julie? I found someone. And it kind of, I think he pushed you into the room, didn't he? And that was the first time I met Julie. And in typical Julie fashion, she was, you know, tenacious, organised, committed. And in combination with Marcus, completely changed that PhD study round. And it just made me realise, you know, when you're working with people who, you know, they're motivated, they want to work and support you, it makes a huge difference. It's not so much all the time your research design, etc., etc. It's about the people that you work with. That's what's really important. And without those people, you don't get any of those ends and those outcomes. And I think I've often reflected on that. And again, I'm not sure if I've said it to you in person, but I am, you know, forever grateful for Julie for what you did. And then Julie saying, I'm not interested in research. This is typical Julie. 3 years later, she was doing an IHR-funded MSc with us at Sheffield, and you loved it. You loved it, didn't you? I'm not doing any more after that, she said. And it wasn't long after. I want to do a PhD, I think. And so subsequently applied, and now Julie, along with Marcus, is doing her own PhD funded through an IHR fellowship. And it's been a long but fruitful relationship. And I think as much as anyone, I've learned so much through Julie's PhD. And that's, I think, a mark of you being able to think differently, do differently, and evolve your ideas. Thank you. But then I completed my PhD, and maybe this is only child syndrome, but I applied for a postdoctoral fellowship in Sheffield, fully expected to get it, had no doubt. But then I got the response, your application has been unsuccessful. And at the time, I was a physiotherapist interested in musculoskeletal problems at the University of Sheffield. And there was no one really, at the University of Sheffield, there was no one in that space. And it's really hard as an individual researcher to develop anything, especially as a very early career researcher. And you need people around you. You need people that have trod this path before. And I really felt at a crossroads and a tension. Sheffield felt like my home, but I didn't see a future there. And this is where Professor Nadine Foster came in. I chuckled to myself. Again, 2012 was quite a year. I'd first met Nadine at our Physiotherapy UK conference in Birmingham. I'd done a presentation about a small study, and the night before I'd been persuaded to go out with colleagues from Sheffield Hallam, and I kept saying no, because I had a marathon on the Sunday, so it was a conference Saturday, marathon on Sunday. So I'm not going out, I'm not drinking. We got in at 4, and the presentation was at 9, and my tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth, you know, my eyes were red. And then you see this other physio legend approaching the platform, and you just kind of keep your head down and keep away because you don't want it to smell your breath and see you. But Nadine, as always, so welcoming, collaborative, and she said, we've got these meetings that happen at Kiel, why don't you come along? It seems like we've got shared interests. So she reached out and gave me a potential platform. Nadine very quickly became a mentor, and some of you in the room have experienced rejections from these personal fellowships. It's very personal, unlike project grants, because it's all about you and it's hard. And I genuinely felt flat, quite low, and not sure about where my next steps were. And Nadine came along and, you know, to summarize the conversation, said, we've got some research money. Why don't you come on a secondment for a few months? Let's see how we work together. Let's look at your postdoctoral fellowship application. Can we package it into something else? So I got an opportunity then to go and spend time with half my time with Nadine and her team at Keele. So still half-time Sheffield, but half-time over at what some people call the mothership of physio research, and that's largely due to Nadine and lots of other tremendous colleagues. So this was now an opportunity to work with one of the most successful researchers in our landscape, and you don't get that all the time. It was an absolute golden opportunity. And it was difficult because it was, up at 5, usually back at 7. The kids were still quite young there. It took its toll. But it felt like it just felt like a golden opportunity. Just working with Nadine, seeing how her team works, how seriously they take the development of grant applications, the time, the dedication, the collaboration, reaching out. It felt it was an evolution in my thinking. And whilst at Keele, a job came up that I applied for. I didn't think I'd get it, but it's always a good chance, I think, with jobs. You can update your CV, you can test yourself in an interview. What's the worst they can do? They can say no. And I was really surprised to then be offered this job at Keele, and it was an absolute no-brainer. This was a step. So this was a senior lecturer in clinical trials, full-time research position, the opportunity to continue to work alongside Nadine and so many other colleagues. And it just felt tremendous. But then I started in November 2016. So we lived in Huddersfield. Keele's in Staffordshire, so you've got to cross the country through the Peak District. And folk used to say to me, "Oh, but that's a lovely journey. It's not at 5 in the morning. It's bloody awful." And when it's snowing and you're thinking, I'm going off and I'm going into that reservoir, it's hair-raising at times, but it was up to 2.5 hours in the morning, usually about 2 hours back, and I could tell it was taking its toll. The kids, almost felt like they were growing up in parallel to me, not with me. And one night I was travelling back and I got stuck in some floods in Glossop. And it always happens, doesn't it? It's sod's law. I thought, I've just got enough petrol to get me home, so I'll do it tomorrow. And so it was freezing. I got stuck between 2 floods, couldn't have the engine on because I didn't have enough petrol. And I thought, this can't continue, but this is my absolute golden opportunity. What do I do? And this is when I called at Aldi on the way home. There was Aldi that I used to drive past. I got a couple of bottles of wine and I put them down and I said, "What do you think about moving?" And I think I'll talk more about this, but in Emily's way, she was supportive as she's always been. But and we ended up finding a lovely place where we're happy in Sandbach. But it was a decision that always weighed very heavily, and it still does weigh heavily on me, because it was a decision that I was taking. The kids were settled. We had a nice home. They were in school. But it was about me and my job. And again, I think testament to the kids as well. They haven't moaned about it. They've just got on with it in a way that I think I probably moaned about in the past when you were thinking about moving. So that's reflective. But when we moved in 2017, I took the youngest back to Huddersfield because they'd started playing football and then had to stop halfway. I went back for the presentation evening. And to see Louis, my youngest, just seeing his old friends and then, just having a whale of a time. As a parent, it really tugged at my heartstrings. But they got on with it, they did it. But in some ways, it still felt like a sacrifice, but not mine, theirs. And I guess I feel fortunate again in that respect that I've had family who've been able to support change in a way that perhaps I might have been resistant to as a young person. That's Chester again. So when I got to Keele, I really felt like stuff started to happen in a really positive way. So the fellowship that had been rejected, with Nadine's support and the team at Keele, we submitted that as a research project grant and it was awarded. I had an idea for another fellowship, which again Nadine supported, submitted, and at the second time, again, the fellowship was awarded. Developed tremendous networks, not just within physiotherapy, not just nationally, internationally, but across disciplines, because that's how they worked at Keele. There was that cross-disciplinary working. And I hope this doesn't sound too strange, but I almost began to understand what it is to be a truly professional researcher, to take this business seriously, to give it the care, the attention that it truly deserves because of the impact that you can have as a researcher. So my message from this is, I hear this message sometimes from colleagues that there's an expectation that you should navigate this research maze, this clinical academic career alone. You shouldn't, you don't need to. There is a support network, people want to support, and it's a big part of our job as well. And through the experience I had, I do, as I said earlier, I now feel really privileged to be able to have worked with a group of really talented people. But I think, Maria, you said it a while ago, we were talking about the group of people that we get to work with, and they're just nice people. They're just a really nice group of people, and we have a community of practice meeting every few months, and it's just nice. It just feels good, feels constructive. People that just want to make a difference to their patients in a really good way. So I guess to anyone that's listening, anyone that's here, anyone that you can talk to, please let them know, don't be afraid to reach out. People are so important, and the networks you develop are so important. And just like a marriage and other relationships, they need investment over time. They need maintaining. So this leads me to more people. Professor Anna Lowe, who was, I felt so, again, privileged to work with Anna. Anna was one of the first colleagues who I worked with through a PhD. And for those of you that know Anna, she's got an amazing approach. And again, I've never told you this, Anna, but you know, when I'm in a difficult situation, one of those difficult conversations, or just one of those awkward colleagues who just seems to want to obstruct, I just think, I wonder what Anna would do. And I know Anna, she just got such skill, such balance, and she just took that skill, balance through a PhD. At times, I think, did your employer say you can have 1 hour, 45 minutes a week to do your PhD? But just took that in a stride, had a great impact in the world of physical activity, and has now progressed onto an enormously successful postdoctoral career. But again, he's just one of life's really great people. Dr. Adrian Mallows, he works as a senior lecturer in physiotherapy in Essex. So this was before COVID, Adrian just reached out. He sent me an email. This was in the time of Skype. Remember Skype? He sent me an email saying, would you be interested in supervising me? And of course I wanted to get more PhD supervision under my belts. And Adrian continued to maintain a very busy university workload, and again made great strides through his PhD. And for any of you that know Adrian, I think this photo sums him up perfectly. I remember he's just so positive. During PhD meetings, you know, we'd always load him up with things to do, and you could just see that chin starting to drop, but then always delivered and never moaned, and just, again, made a great contribution and really helped people think differently about tendon problems and the role of psychosocial factors. And then Maria Moffat, who's in the audience, who's completed her PhD recently. Again, for those of you that know Maria, she brings such enthusiasm to work. If you ever come to work and you're down and you go to a meeting with Maria, she picks you up, and that's really important. You know, in our world, rejection is the absolute usual outcome. We're kicked in the balls all the time. But then to have someone with such enthusiasm, such commitment to the job, It's an absolute pleasure to work with, but I think there's another really important part as well, that I don't think there's a day goes by, and Maria does this in a really nice way, where she says, I think you need to think about that differently. Never quite tells me I'm wrong, but that's what she's inferring. And that you need those kind of people around you, that infectious enthusiasm, and just that stimulation to think differently, think beyond your box. And these two characters. So it's Gareth Stevens, and then on the left, Andrew Cuff on the right. Again, both on their PhD journeys, both incredibly successful in their own rights. Gareth now head of research at the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital. Basically, the hospital just wanted you, didn't they? We want you in this role. And I've worked with Gareth now, it's almost 5 years. And I really love thinkers. You know, people that don't just want to do all the time and just think. And I love Gareth's starting conversation. If we could do physiotherapy again, if we had a blank sheet, what would it look like? Because it wouldn't look like this. And those are the kind of thoughts. And I think we've grown a lot together over 5 years. We've been at Keele together. We've been in Manchester together. Gareth now doing his PhD here at Edgehill. And it's an absolute pleasure to work and see someone just, I guess, grown. I've told you this, but Gareth makes me smile. He loves coming into university. You can just tell he's an absolute full-time academic of the future. You just love the environment, the thought process. And I learn so much from just being in the same room as Gareth and just listening to him and the thoughts. It's an absolute pleasure. And Andrew, just an absolute superb talent. I was saying earlier, I interviewed Andrew for his PhD a few years ago, and hand on heart, I've never experienced such an eloquent interview from someone. He'd prepared so well, it meant so much to him. And he's such an achiever, a national musculoskeletal lead for a national provider of physiotherapy, always searching for the next thing to do, the next achievement. But alongside all these demands, continues to deliver on a really interesting PhD that's looking around, okay, as a patient, you want a scan. As a clinician, you can do a scan. But what do you do with those findings? Does it have any bearing on the treatment you receive or your clinical outcomes? And Andrew's making great waves. An absolute pleasure to work with both. And now, other colleagues, Gareth Whelan, at the bottom right there. I don't think Gareth really appreciates his impact. So Gareth was awarded a pre-doctoral fellowship by the NIHR last year. So again, what the Department of Health are saying to you is, okay, you're a busy clinician, I will fund your time, your salary, give you some training costs to prepare what is a competitive PhD application. And I first met Gareth in 2019 and supported him to apply. He wasn't successful, but one of the key attributes of a successful researcher is resilience. And Gareth, boy, was Gareth resilient. He didn't just go away with his tail between his legs. He continued to push forward in research. He completely revamped his profile for that next time. But what he did very generously is he gave his time. He spoke to colleagues about these pre-doctoral fellowship applications, and then inspired Lisa Pitt to apply for a pre-doctoral fellowship application with him last year, and that was awarded. So they both started their clinical academic career fellowships. And I'm forever grateful to Gareth for that leadership he's shown and how he's helped to develop our community of practice. And I think probably he needs to recognise that a little bit more himself. And then Lisa, I think, this is a bit bad, but Lisa was the first person that, I don't think you know this, Lisa, really made me think about my approach to supervision and feedback. And Maria is great at picking me up on this, and she does all the time, but I can tend to be over the top with feedback and write lots. And Lisa, I think, was the first person who said, sometimes that affects me in a negative way. Can we think about doing things differently? And it just felt it was a real great wake-up call and just a really great start to our working relationship. And now Lisa is embarking on her own clinical academic career pathway. And these three, again, so Pauline is in the audience on the left, Pauline May, Kieran Mitham in the middle, Tash Mar on the right. I think I've worked with Pauline for almost 3 years now. And again, just consistently impressed with her approach, her resilience, and just a desire to develop. There's that desire that it's inherent almost. And I just felt so pleased this year when Pauline was awarded her own pre-doctoral fellowship, because she's bloody worked for that for a number of years, really worked hard, and I can see has a great clinical academic career ahead of her as well. But again, has been fully engaged in not just supporting herself, but other people. Very quickly, these guys have been not just, it's about me and my journey. Okay, I've got a community around me, and that's important. And Pauline is great at doing that. Kieran, still quite early in his physio career, initially began to work with Adrian Mallows. That's how we got in touch. Again, wasn't successful the first time in his pre-doctoral fellowship application, but with Pauline and Tash was awarded this time. And again, I might have said it earlier, but genuinely working with these guys and the others, it's probably the part of the job that I love the most. Maybe I should recognise other parts, but when you've got the opportunity, and it feels a very fortunate opportunity to work with such nice and talented people every single day, it makes work a joy. And then Tash contacted me last year, said I'd like to go for one of these pre-doc fellowships, been speaking to Julie. You do the same, you seem to meet everybody, don't you? You've got a tremendous network. And it was around July, August last year that Tash said, I want to do this, great. We arranged a second meeting, and she said, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant. Okay, when are you due? A couple of weeks. And I guess a mark of Tash that even having a baby, and a second one, she's still just completely committed to this process, I want this fellowship, this is the path. And as much as anyone, Tash is one of the most driven people I know, and I think we reflect on this a lot. The way she affects people, she's just got a way of influencing people positively, a lovely curiosity about what she does. And so I do feel so privileged to be working with these three guys and being able to support them on their journeys. But then, home is where the heart is. I feel sorry for Emily, my wife. You know, I've lost count of how many midlife crises I've had. To wanting to jack my job in to retrain as a vet. I wanted to sell the house, downsize, get a big garden so we could have a beagle sanctuary. Doing these 10 marathons in 10 days, and then wanting to do it again, and then wanting to do it again and again. Then moving jobs, houses, countries. She has a constant stream of, shall we? What about this? And she manages me really well, but you know, I don't think she's ever said no. Or what she might say is, I've never heard her say no. But then there was a light bulb moment on Sunday. We were talking on Sunday in the kitchen, and you remember you came across to me and said, you always come round to my way of thinking, don't you? And I thought, she knows me better than I know myself, doesn't she? She's just been manipulating me for 25 years. But again, it's another situation where I've been really fortunate to have that support at home, to have, you know, a sensible voice, just someone who I can constantly bounce ideas off and will give me a pragmatic view. And I think I've been able to push in certain ways because of Emily's pragmatism and support. And I know it's not been easy, the amount of times I'm there but I'm not there, I'm away at a weekend or I'm doing something else, or the night working. I think it's hard, you know, when you're used to doing those things, you sometimes don't appreciate the impact it has on your partner. But Emily returned to study last year to do an MSc in mental health nursing, and the role was reversed a little bit, and you realise that hole that you leave when you're constantly thinking about work and pushing. And it's in that way, you know, I'm stood here tonight, and there's a little sense of regret inside me, and I guess I just wanted to share this. We've got 3 fantastic boys who don't want to be here tonight. And there is a sense in me of, you know, I have been there, but too often not being there. And I guess for any of you that are on this journey, just really try and recognise what's truly important. Research can wait, the accolades can wait, the prizes can wait. But these 3 are ugly teenagers already, and it just flies by. And then finally, again, I don't think my parents will mind me saying this, but they had me when they were 17 and 18 years old, still finding their own ways in life. And I wasn't a bad kid. I was a good kid, but I think in many ways I was a difficult kid. I couldn't come second in anything. So Mum, you might have recognised the Ladybird book of timetables at the start. We used to spend hours every single night, because if I came second in the times table test at junior school, I hated it. I used to like acting as a kid, so I'd often get roles in the plays and the assemblies. And if I'd get the lines on a Monday, for example, I couldn't go to bed that night until I'd learned all the lines. And I'm not sure I could be as patient as a parent as what my mum's been, and all the reading and all that stuff that goes on. And at the same time with all that, I saw my dad working tremendously hard all the time, usually out in the garage in the night time, knocking the heck out of another car just to make a bit of money, to sell it on, just to move on. And that was the environment that I grew up in. Again, I feel really fortunate. A stable environment, 2 parents who I knew always had my back, but I saw them with a significant work ethic. And I think that's really influenced me and my approach to life. I'll finish there. My take-home messages. You know, I've mentioned these awards, these accolades, these publications, they're all really nice. But, you know, what really matters is, you know, you people in the room, friends, colleagues, family, people online. That's what I genuinely reflect on at this stage in my career. I feel much prouder of the relationships I have than any of the awards, the publications. It feels much more important. And I love this little cartoon. I saw it on Facebook. So in life, it's not where you go, but it's who you travel with. And on that, I'll end and say thank you very much.